I'm Sharon Horne-Ellstrom here, also known as Pajama Grandma, with the amazing Annabelle Beckwith. She is going to talk to us today about how we can use leadership and why leadership is important in supersizing our business. Annabelle is from Scotland, so that's pretty exciting. At least for me, it's exciting to be able to talk to somebody and learn from people all around the world and share them with you. So Annabelle, you could just tell us a little bit about your background, why you do what you do, and then we'll ask about why it's important to us.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to take part in the interview. I'm really delighted to. I'm really excited as well. So from here in Scotland to be talking to you in the States and wherever anybody else is. I've been working for the last nearly 20 years. I've been training and coaching business leaders in a wide variety of contexts and organizations globally. But that's not where it started. Before that, I had probably a checkered career is probably the best way to describe it. I worked in TV production for a while. I was a researcher for a politician for a while. And through a series of jobs, I found myself in a management role. I was head of development and public affairs, basically marketing and fundraising at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. Now, at that point, I had no leadership training. I didn't really know what I was doing, so I was very much like feeling my way instinctively through it. And it was okay. My team seemed happy. I seemed to be getting results and so on. There were points where I thought, I know I'm not doing this right, but I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, I left that job in order to set up on my own and to work with a colleague and actually use the performing arts more creative methods in a learning and training environment. So that was about 18 years ago. So since then, I've worked with leaders in a wide variety of different organizations. And that is when I started to see, with hindsight, all of the mistakes that I had been making when I was in a leadership role myself. There were certain things where I thought, oh, yeah, that's what I do. I kind of did that. And then there were certain things where I thought, oh my goodness, oh my word, if only I had known this back then, I would have been better at giving feedback to my direct reports, at framing the strategy, at influencing other senior colleagues. It was only in hindsight that I thought, oh my goodness, look how lucky I was not to louse it up completely, because I think I really was lucky. But over the years, what I've started to see in terms of leadership is that every company is different, every individual is different, they bring their personality to it, but good leadership is good leadership wherever it is. It could be a manufacturing plant in Malaysia, it could be a bank in Edinburgh and Scotland, it could be a cosmetics company in Saudi Arabia, it could be anybody. Good leadership is good leadership, and you start to see these patterns and think, aha, this is what good leaders do, and also this is the impact that they have on their organizations and the people around them. And the other thing that has really, really impressed upon me over the years, working in a wide variety of contexts, is that leadership is not just about stuff that you know and things that you do. It is fundamentally about who you are. And I think a lot of leaders underestimate that. And us underestimate how the power of their own personality is coming across on a day-by-day basis to the benefit of their organization and their company, or sometimes not so much. But that's kind of my brief background in a nutshell. And at the moment, I continue to work with global organizations, with leaders at all levels. So they might be people who are stepping into their first leadership role. It could be very senior managers, and also with entrepreneurs who are looking to grow and scale their businesses, which is, I guess, why we're talking today.
Absolutely. We have entrepreneurs or smaller business owners generally is who we're working with, or who I'm working with, and who is attracted to work with me, because that's where my background was. I had a corporate career too, and I remember being thrown into those first leadership roles and thinking, oh my God, what are you supposed to do? Because most of the people I worked with they'd worked for the organizations a lot longer. They were all men. And so, they didn't want to listen to a woman in the first place. So I had to take a bunch of leadership training and read a bunch of books and stuff early on just to try to keep my head above water.
Yeah.
So if you're working with somebody who's leading their own organization, what is like one of the most fundamental things that you tell them they need to do or learn or be? Like, I know, like you said, I made so many mistakes that it would have been nice. There wasn't any leadership training back really when I started my career. Because like we discussed earlier, I'm pretty old. So it was just a matter of you had to just figure it out. So if somebody's a newer leader or running their own business, what would you recommend that they do immediately?
So the first thing, and it's kind of twofold, I think the first thing is to be really, really clear about your goals and what is it that you want to achieve. And actually, the reason I'm saying that's twofold, and perhaps particularly with entrepreneurs, is often people will have aspirations for their business and what they want their business to do, or if they're in an organization, they'll have aspirations for what they want their team or their department to do if they're in a leadership role. But it's also really important to focus on what are actually your personal goals. What's your life? What are your lifestyle goals? Because these two things they're not like opposed. They have to mix together. And so that's really, really crucial. Like, what are your personal goals and how do those tie in with your organizational goals? Now, the reason I think it's a pivotal thing anyway. Be crystal clear. If you're not clear on it yourself, you're not going to be able to articulate it to your team as effectively as you might. The other thing is just recently, I know a lot of entrepreneurs because I've been involved in this co-working centre, and there's been a few people who have it's not gone well for them. It's not gone well. And what has happened in those instances is that those people have actually received bad advice from the banks in particular, wanting to lend them money and so on. And they found themselves in a spot of bother. There's one person who, the business is going well, but this particular individual is saying, I still haven't drawn a salary yet, and it's nearly 2 years. Now, she's in a position where her husband's got an excellent job and can bankroll her business startup. Not everybody's in that situation. But there's the thing where you have to be crystal clear as to like what are you going to work through in terms of your personal life? What are your personal goals? What are your personal circumstances, and how does that fit around your entrepreneur's journey? Because you have to be able to live. You have to have a work-life balance and so on. I think a lot of people at the early stages of the business perhaps don't focus on that, and then find that actually their business is running them. They're not running the business. But focusing on the business aspect, the most crucial thing is be crystal clear on what is it that you're trying to achieve. What's the overall vision and the purpose of what you're trying to do? And actually, Simon Sinek's work on Start With Why is really good here. So it's, what is your higher purpose? Then, how are you achieving that? And what is it that you're actually delivering? To start with your why, have a sense of purpose and be really clear about how big do you want the company to grow? What are your aspirations for this next year? If you're not really clear on your goals and your vision, and working down from that your strategy for what's the game plan for the next year, 18 months, 2 years, to start moving towards that higher vision, then you're not going to be able to articulate that to your team. What that means is that your team are likely to pick up a message of, this is what I'm doing, but I'm not quite sure why. I don't really know I know I'm going in this direction, but I don't really know what the end game is. And that's not particularly motivating. So that would be my strongest advice, is be really, really clear. I was working with somebody just last year, actually, where this was an issue. It was a small company, but the man who was in charge, whenever I asked him, so what's the goal? What's the strategy? He would literally tap his forehead and go, it's all up here. It's no good up here. It needs to be on a piece of paper. It needs to be spoken. It needs to be really, really clearly understood by everybody. Otherwise, people are working in the dark. So that's, I think, the most crucial thing. And everything else stems from that. Once you know what your goal is, then you can devise your strategy of how you're going to reach that goal. Once you know what your goal is, then you know who do you need to hire or outsource to, who will contribute to reaching that goal. You know which are the processes that you need to put in place and the systems that will support you as you reach that goal. Everything comes from that as the starting point. So it's really important not to jump the gun and to make sure that's crystal clear first of all.
Absolutely fantastic advice. I think I've said that before as well, haven't I? I didn't pay her to say it, honest.
Yeah, but it's true.
No, so true.
Yeah.
Because you can find yourself if it's like if you don't have a destination in mind and you hop in the car, you can end up anywhere because you're just going without any direction. I mean, there's so many metaphors for that, but it's so true. And the worst part is other people can't support and help you because they have no idea where you're going. And I've only seen that work a few times where somebody has it in their head. And I think how much better could have their results have been if they'd gotten it out of their head and let other people support and help them in what they wanted to achieve, because it's impossible. And the most upset employees I've ever worked with or people I've ever worked with are people that have like more than one boss or more than one direction, because it's so confusing, and a confused mind in anything says no and just shuts down. And so people can't do their best work if they're confused about where they're going and what they're doing, or if they have no idea why they're doing it or how it fits into the big picture. Because people, and it doesn't even have to really be a rational reason. They just have to have a reason why and how you're doing something. Well, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we've done it. And so we're going to do it this way. That's not rational most of the time. It's actually one of my most hated phrases in corporate America was, well, that's the way we've always done it. Okay, I get that, but that doesn't mean it's the right way or the smart way to do it.
Yeah.
So
right.
that's wonderful.
Yeah,
people have to know what to expect.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because there's just as you were speaking there, a couple of examples came to mind, and there's one. It's a smallish company. It's probably about 15 employees, and they've got a reasonable turnover, but and the people who run it, they don't have a strategy. They very much go with the flow, and actually for them it works because an opportunity will come up, and they're quite intuitive in terms of their leadership, and they'll say, I feel this is the right way to go. But the thing is, like, what works in their favour is that they're really, the culture of the organisation is attuned to this way of leadership. And also they are very good at articulating, right, we feel we're moving in this direction because, but that will only work, I think, with a smaller organisation. With a larger organisation, there is the risk, particularly where you get like different management structures, different layers of leadership, where people further down the line, the message doesn't get through, the why piece of the message doesn't get through, that this is what we're doing, and this is why. It just turns into this is what we're doing. And there, the people who are actually implementing the strategy are going, oh, well, I don't know, last month they were saying this, now we're doing something, whatever. They wake up in the morning and whatever comes into their heads. So it works with a small and a close-knit team. It becomes much more difficult to manage with a larger team. And I think that's also a factor is that, as you say, people want to know the why. They want to be able to contribute to the organisation. So if a leader is holding that information and saying, right, well, I've figured out the why, I'm going to cut to the chase and just say, this is what I want you to do, here's the what, people don't have that sense of buy-in to the overall vision and mission. And again, there's somebody else that I've been working with who, through the strength of his personality, people will go, okay, he says that's what we're doing, that's what we're doing. But as his company grows and people don't know him personally, then that's not going to be enough. There's going to have to be a culture in place. There's going to have to be systems and processes and brand guidelines and so on, and a clear communications like mechanisms or ways of passing on this why message, because he can't leverage his own personality because people don't know him. There are actually offices in different parts of the country. So it becomes increasingly complex, I think, as the company gets bigger. And I think that's sometimes things that can catch leaders out as well. You can grow it, they'll grow it instinctively up to a point, and then it gets to a point where it's, oh, well, that's not working anymore. Why is it not working? It was working up until now. Well, because you've got to a bit of a plateau, and there's different things now that need to happen moving forward.
Definitely. I've seen that in my own businesses and in corporate America, especially because the information doesn't trickle down unless you build that into the culture. I've worked for companies that do build that into the culture from the top down, and there is that communication. And the results of those companies are so much better than other companies. I think that old authoritarian style doesn't work in management anymore. I think people are sophisticated enough that they're not going to put up with it if they don't understand, especially the younger people. If they don't understand why or what their purpose is in it, they will actually just walk out of the job. Yeah. I've never experienced that before this last generation. I don't know about you, but I've never worked for anyone or been in a company where people would just not show up the next day. But I found that in the last couple of companies, the last couple I worked with, they're like, yeah, people just don't show up for work. They'll just stop coming. They won't call, nothing. They just disappear. And I'm like, okay, that's a new turn of events. And I think, well, maybe that's because they're missing some piece of why it's important that they show up and why they're here and what their role is in the organization. So that makes sense. And the bigger, every company does hit different growth plateaus where that just doesn't necessarily translate unless it's been built into the culture all along. Yeah. I think probably Steve Jobs and Apple has a very different culture than a lot of other organizations.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it is one of those things that different leaders, it's not like, for somebody who's starting a business, it's not like, right, well, when you hit the 5 million turnover mark, that's when you hit the plateau. It's not like that. Somebody might actually get to the bit of a plateau when they move from being a solo entrepreneur to hiring a team, and they're thinking, now I've got these people, they're looking at me, they're expecting me to lead. Well, what do I do? That might be the plateau where you think, right, now upskill now, and actually probably the best thing I could possibly do is upskill at that point and start building the culture and be doing these things deliberately rather than leaving it to chance. Because other people might get 5-6 years down the line and think, goodness, how did this happen? I've got a culture where people are doing something that's not particularly helpful, and that will have been a pattern that's kind of evolved over time. It doesn't happen overnight. But other people might get to a point. So there was one company I was working with recently that, again, the man who started it out, self-made man who started it out and just kind of grew it instinctively, and he's got to a £20 million turnover. But and so by all standards, a very, very successful man. But he's keen to move it on and for it to be an even bigger, national company rather than national UK as opposed to national Scotland. But that's where he's hit his plateau, and he's recognising, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to take this forward. I know that if I do, I've got to do some different things. Of course, he's very wealthy. It's like, do I want to do that, or do I want to sell it, spend more time with my kids? So actually, bizarrely, his plateau has come at the 20 million turnover mark, which is quite unusual, I would suggest.
I was going to say, I think people usually hit a plateau that they have to make a change way before then. I do think the first one is usually when you go from being a solopreneur to having to hire your first people and make a team. That's definitely where you need to change. And I weigh in on this. I don't think that the person that started the business and leads it has to be the person that becomes the ultimate leader. But if they're not going to be, they need to get those skills into the organization through another person or in some other way.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And this whole business of the famous people, like whether it's Tom Hunter, who's a Scottish billionaire, who's very well known locally here, or the people we've heard of, the Richard Bransons, Elon Musks, and so on. They are unusual in starting. Like Richard Branson started out living on a houseboat because he couldn't actually afford a house. Now he owns an island. But the famous ones who have started from absolutely nothing and taken it to like global organizations worth billions of dollars, they're unusual. Most people will take it to a particular level. Somebody might think, do you know what? I get a company to that level and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I get it to there and then I sell it and then I start again and I build it to there and I sell it. There's many different ways of going about it, but I think you're absolutely right, Sharon. It's really important to recognise that there needs to be a skill set in terms of the leader. And actually, even if you look at Richard Branson, he's very much the showman, but his business partner and his team are the ones also who really have the skills with the finance and the operational side and who will fill the gaps there. So it may well be, if the company is going to grow, that it might be that the person who started it out stays as the chief executive, but they've got a really, really strong team around them who are entrusted in that. This is the inner council. This is the senior leadership team who have specialist skills in particular areas, whether it's marketing, it's operations, it's sales, it's human resources, whatever is required by that by that company. Or indeed, other people will have an executive board or mentors and advisors, and there might be a partnership of 2 or 3 people who have complementary skills who then take it forward. But it's always going to require a skill set. So actually, I think this is another thing that any leader at any level, even a solopreneur leading their own business on their own, must be aware of, is to be really self-aware and think, what is my zone of genius? What do I really contribute to this business? What am I doing to help it grow? And where am I not so hot, frankly? Where do I need to leverage the skills of other people? Because you can't get one person doing everything. And actually that recognition of, okay, so I'm not great at this. Let me outsource initially, perhaps, or hire somebody who will bring in complementary skills, so that together the leadership team is moving forward in a it's just stronger and more sustainable. Basically, if you've got that skill set at the top, one person is pretty unlikely to have all of the skills required to supersize their business, I would suggest.
So do you go in, like when you start to work with a new person, do you go in and do like a leadership assessment for them and kind of just determine where they're at and where they're weak? Where does their leadership as a whole need to be beefed up? Or, do you know what I mean by that? I'm asking, do you go in and do some kind of an assessment? I come from a quality background. So the first thing I do whenever I look at any organization is I do like an analysis and an assessment or an audit. And I look at, okay, where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Where are some opportunities for you? And then where are you, if you don't fix this right now, you're screwed. That's the kind of thing I do. So do you do the same kind of thing, but for leadership? So
yeah, it's kind of a similar thing. And it's the reason why I'll focus on leadership is that with the sort of companies that I'm working with, it's the leader who they need to spearhead whatever it is that we're doing moving forward. But you're absolutely right. I think you have to do that, do you not, Sharon? You have to go in and ask questions and analyse and see the lay of the land, because you need to know. You can't go in there and go, right, here's the magic pill that will sort everything. So it's very much about talking to them about what are their aspirations, what are their personal aspirations, what are their business aspirations, how are things going, where do they feel there's a problem or a challenge? Because let's face it, people will be talking to us because they recognise that they need something, even if they can't quite put their finger on it and be specific about what that thing is. So yeah, extensive conversations, and then speaking to other people and speaking to the team and saying, oh, well, what do you find? And sometimes if you're speaking to the team, they'll go, oh yeah, it's lovely, yeah, I really love. Because obviously they know that the boss has said, oh, go and speak to Jemima about such and such. But you get a sense, you start to hear patterns, even if somebody, they won't be able to stop themselves, even if they mention something, a little thing, oh, that's interesting. And then somebody else will think, oh, right, okay, I'm starting to piece this together now. So you're looking for things on many different levels. And then it's a question of saying, okay, this is my initial assessment, as I'm sure you would do as well. Like, here's what I'm seeing. I'm always quite careful how I phrase it. This is what I'm seeing and this is what I'm hearing, rather than here's your problem.
Yeah.
Because, it could be something, it could be wider than one. So in some instances, it's quite obvious, because same as anything really, if you're in a situation, it's your own business, you cannot see clearly because you're just too close to it. It's not even in focus. It takes somebody coming from outside to go, oh, look at that. So quite often it is, so like with one company that I'm working with at the moment, they're looking to expand nationally. And one of the issues there is that the leader has grown it very successfully, within the local area, and now they're growing by acquisition, so they're buying similar companies elsewhere in the country, and they're looking to recruit elsewhere. And here's the thing, and this is, I guess, partly because I've seen it before with other organisations, where it's a question of saying, okay, here's what you need to watch out for. You need to really have documented procedures, and you need to guard your culture now. Because otherwise, if you're based here in Scotland, if you buy somewhere in Wales, it's like 400 or 500 miles away with a very different culture, then this is the mothership now. So you need to get that headquarters mentality. But there will be a cultural divide between these two. They will think, oh, them in Scotland, there will be a cultural divide, and a subculture will start to develop there. It will, because it can't not. That's just the way human beings work in these situations. So it's like, what you need to do now is, and they're going, oh, right, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Right, okay. So there's certain things like that. In other instances, it can be going in and actually highlighting things that people, they kind of know, but nobody's articulated it. So again, working with another organisation locally, I didn't work with them for too long because it just wasn't a fit. They didn't particularly want to change, but the senior leadership team had said, oh, they're very laissez-faire. They've got a hands-off management style, so they let people get on with it. And speaking to people within the organisation, it was quite clear that people didn't feel that they were getting enough direction. So what happened is that some of the stronger characters lower down the organisation just rolled up their sleeves and thought, right, okay, not getting any direction, let's do this. And the senior leadership were actually a bit kind of, oh, look, they're overstepping the mark there, they've got ideas above themselves. It's, well, no, because what you've said that you're laissez-faire, you've said that you're hands-off, you're too hands-off, and that if you're not actively leading, somebody else will, and that's what this person has done. So, you know, the situations are good. So you either allow for that and say, okay, we just let leaders emerge, or my recommendation, you do something to lead to lead more strongly, to be clear about direction, to be clear about strategy. Otherwise, people, if in the absence of information, people will make stuff up, and they kind of knew that. Because they were going, no. But they didn't want to change. In which case, I can't help them.
See you later. I can't help you. Yep, that's what happens.
And sometimes, that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes you've got to step away and say, well, good luck, gentlemen.
More often than not, it's really interesting. And I recently had this realization, and I knew it when I was running my businesses. But when I look back at whenever we hit a plateau with respect to growth or something, I was always the bottleneck. I, as the owner, was the one holding it up. If I wasn't developed and moving along ahead of the curve with respect to the direction the company was going in, then it would just dead stop. And so sometimes we would just have to stop until I actually developed the skills or figured out what I was going to do to bring them on board before we could move to that next level. But I had just these aha moments this week that every single time that's happened in my career and in my businesses, it was because of me, and I wasn't ready yet to move to the next level. I just started wondering and thinking, I'm going to be looking for it more and more now. Is that true? Is it true that an organization can only grow as fast as the leaders do, or as the leadership group will allow it to? Because
I think that's
I'm kind of wondering.
Yeah.
Or is it just me? A lot of things are just me, but sometimes I think, no, maybe it isn't just me. Maybe that is the way things actually naturally evolve and happen.
Yes, and I think that's a real moment of insight. And actually, Sharon, I would say also for you to have the humility to say, oh gosh, it was me. I might have at the time been looking around thinking, that's the processes, or it's my team, or is it actually that'll be me. And for me, certainly when I was in my leadership role, there were certain things where I was also the bottleneck. I was working within an organisation, but my team were wanting to do things, and it was me being hesitant and cautious, going, no, wait, and I should have let them get on with it earlier because they were right. It was me that was hesitating and holding them back. And I think that is a really key thing actually for a leader, to actually have the humility to say that, and to recognise that the company is only going to grow if the leadership does. But for me, I think this is the pattern I've seen is for people who step up to leadership, the ones who actually openly learn and grow, and share that with their teams. They're well respected. They're actually role modeling behaviours that will be copied elsewhere in the organisation. And there's a leader who sprang to mind who I was working with a couple of years ago, who was absolutely stand out for me, because it was a sales leadership program that I was working on with this particular company, and he was there with his direct reports. He was the director, and then there was direct reports, and he was there with them, and he was very much leading by example. And if he didn't know somebody, he wasn't pretending to have all of the answers. He was going, well, that's an interesting one. I'm not sure. Let's work this out together. And he absolutely had the respect of his team. And so when he asked something of them, they would say, yeah, okay, we'll give that a go, because this guy is leading in that way. He has that humility to recognize that he doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes it is him. But also, as you've said, you were reading books, you were consuming information, you were trying to learn. That's also role modeling something for other people to follow. So I think that's a massive point you just hit on there, actually, Michelle. And it's not just you. I would agree. I think that's one of those patterns that happens everywhere. Small organisations, solopreneurs. If you hit a buffer and you think, oh, I don't know how to do that, or I don't know, you must learn. You must push yourself outside the comfort zone, even more so if you're then leading a team of people.
Interesting. So we had a chat last week about some of the cool and interesting ways you teach leadership strategy. I would love if you would share one or two of those with people, because I think that it would really inspire them to know that, hey, you don't have to go read a book. You don't have to watch a gazillion YouTube videos. There's a lot of different creative ways to learn to be a great leader. And I think Annabelle does an amazing job. She's so creative in terms of the things that she's thought up and done and led people through to understand these concepts and to just look at them from a different perspective. I think that that's so valuable. Being able to see things from a different perspective is like probably one of the most helpful, valuable skills that you bring to the table.
Do you know what? It stems from my earnest belief that life is showing us the way. Life is teaching us lessons that are all hidden in plain sight. We just don't see them because we're trying to overthink things. Most things are simpler than we think they are, and actually most like leadership lessons, somebody somewhere has done it before. The technology and the context might be changing or might be new, but this has happened before. So in terms of leadership development, I'm always really keen to look for and to work with people and sort of lead them out of the business environment and to look for lessons elsewhere. So, for example, one of the things we were talking about last week, and this did come from working at the Music and Drama Academy, is actually working with musicians and working with conductors, orchestral conductors. I think, well, now there's an interesting thing about the orchestral conductor, because the orchestral conductor is probably an instrumental performer themselves. They will have started out when they were 6 or 7, learning to play the cello or the violin or something like this, and then they've taken a different route. But actually, there's a case in point. Actually, a friend of mine called Chris Gray, and I knew him when he was a student at the academy, and he played the double bass. And I went to see his final student performance, and lo and behold, I bumped into him about like 12 years later, and he said that he's now an academic at a university here, but he conducted operas. And I was thinking, how fascinating! You were playing the double bass, and now you're conducting an opera. And the thing he said, well, I thought, oh, listen to that, was he said, I know, he says, it's nuts. I'm standing there on the podium, I raise my baton, and the curtains open, and the lights come on. And it was like, oh my goodness, because he doesn't know anything about the lighting technicians' walls are way back at the top of the theatre. He doesn't know anything about the stagecraft and the assistants, the stage manager, like pulling at the curtains. He doesn't know any of that. He knows how to play the double bass. And there's the double bass player at the back of the orchestra there. However, he's pulling everybody together. Now, and that was, now look at that. Isn't that a metaphor for somebody who is a leader of a team where there are like different skills going on? So, and that might be the chief executive of a large organization where there's a manufacturing function and so on. But if you look at the orchestral conductor, there's still a really valuable metaphor there for, I think, any leader to say, actually, you don't need to know everything about everything. You need to be able to lead. You need to be able to get everybody, quite literally, working together in harmony. you need to have the kind of overall view so that, you know, if the trumpet section is a bit loud, you could direct them to be a bit quiet and bring somebody else up. So, and that was really, it was really interesting taking groups in to watch the orchestra rehearse and just say, we're not going to liken this to any management model, just watch. Just watch, see what you take from how the conductor works with the orchestra during this rehearsal period. And almost invariably, people would kind of go, "Oh, look at that!" And the way he was listening, and he spotted something over there, and there was something where somebody went, "Sorry, that was me." It's like, okay, we don't need to pause and go over that piece again because somebody's recognised that they made a mistake. So that was a really powerful metaphor there. Other things that we've done is. I know another thing I mentioned to you was in the context of team building and team working was to go to the zoo and look at how different social animals, so, you know, not a tiger that's pacing around on its own, but like meerkats, for example. So meerkats are a matriarchal grouping. I think, well, that's interesting. How are they looking at the apes in particular, the chimpanzees and capuchin monkeys, and seeing how their society functions. And there's the the name of the author escapes me, but there's the book The Chimp Paradox, which is talking about, you know, your inner chimp and when you become overly emotional and so on. But actually, if you look at higher level primates, they display certain behaviours that that we do sometimes see in the workplace. And again, it was interesting to say, okay, as higher level primates, sometimes there are things that are guiding us with, you know, our animal brains, our limbic brains within the workplace at a very deep rooted instinctive level are causing us to behave and respond in a particular way. And we're not animals, you know, we're trying to run a company here. You know, we must be mindful of this, but there are still useful parallels to draw about human behaviour. History is another thing. I mean, I'm a bit of a history geek, and I'm really blessed here in the west of Scotland. There's so many castles and history and, you know, stories from centuries ago. And actually, if you look at patterns of leadership, so there's a castle just up the road, Dundonald Castle, which is a ruin now. So at one point, it was really important to the kings of Scotland. It was one of their strongholds. And if you look at how in the banqueting hall, the main hall of the castle, how it was structured and how everybody sat, so the king and the queen, or the highest nobles, were on the top table. And then there were, in order of importance, it was the knights and the grandees, and getting a little bit lower. And at the back end, you know, back in the kitchens or something, would be, you know, the minor knights or somebody who might get a few scraps from the king's table. And you think, psychologically, that is not a million miles away to the positioning of people around a boardroom. So there's the chairman at the top, and then where you position yourself around that table is very subconsciously signaling to other people around that table how important you are. So if you're at the back end of the table as far away as possible from the chairman, looking like you want to be the quickest one to leave, that's the equivalent of the minor squire at the back end of the banqueting hall who doesn't really matter. The people who are sitting nearest the chair are signalling that they are more important. So it's a very, very subliminal thing, but again, we can learn from history, like, oh gosh, yes, you know, put Robert the Bruce's banqueting table, boardroom, meetings, and that might not be particularly important if you're an entrepreneur with a small team. But let's imagine there's going to be situations where you're walking into a boardroom of a client, perhaps to give a presentation or something. So actually being able to carry yourself in a particular way and to have an understanding about the positioning within the room and the territory within the room and the subconscious hierarchy of where you're standing could actually be quite useful. So again, it's what I would encourage people to do is look for these patterns. Don't, I mean, of course, reading books and listening to, you know, experts in these things is always going to be useful. But, you know, think laterally. Think laterally. You know, look at almost anything, to be quite honest. Look at the school playground. There's always one kid that everybody wants to play with, or who seems to be, you know, deciding who gets to be, if it's the little girls, or who gets to be the fairy princess, or, you know, or you know, who's going to go and play football and be the goalkeeper. There's always, look at children and see how they operate, because actually, unchecked, the behaviours you see in the playground are the behaviours you see in the boardroom years later. But just look laterally at other sectors, at other environments that are outside your own, because there will be practices and principles that you'll go, oh, goodness me, we do that. It's not the same, it's different, but we do that. Or there's something that we could do. They do that there within the theatre. They do that there. Anthropologists do this when they're digging up ruins, or whatever it happens to be. A props maker will do this when he's building something for a movie set. That part of his creative process is something that we could bring into our own portfolio as something that we can use to help us innovate. So it's purely a matter of just keep your eyes and ears open. Just be open to influences that aren't immediately obvious. And I promise you, you will get insights. You will start to go, oh God, look at that! Look at out in the garden, animals, birds, whatever. Lessons are hidden absolutely everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. It only takes for us to notice them, and then just forge that connection between what is that thing, and how is that thing now useful to me in my business context. So it's not. It's not like, I mean, it's unusual in terms of the way that I work with people, but it's not something that is unique to me. Anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. You just need to think laterally and look more broadly than you might be used to doing.
Well, I think it is unique to you. I've never heard of anybody doing that. I suppose some people do some experiential leadership things, but they seem more, I guess, I don't know, more not intentional. I can't even talk. More intentional, but they seem more strategic, like their boot camps or things like that. And to me, that's very different. That's a different experiential learning environment than what you provide people. And I think that what you provide people is a different way of looking at things. And it's a lot more powerful because you're teaching us to look around ourselves and look for the lesson and be open to the lesson, and we'll find the answers that we need. And most people that do leadership training don't teach you to do that. They tell you, here's my answer. Go to this boot camp. Let us beat the crap out of you for a few days, and then you'll go be back and be a better leader, which I don't think is necessarily true at all. I find that kind of horrifying, actually.
No, and I think fundamentally for me, and again, it's the same with coaching people. It's like, my intention when working with somebody is like, I'm just going to show you some different ways of thinking. Yes, there are some best practice principles and models, and yet let me put those in there because it's useful to know, rather than guessing your way through it, or taking ages to find this, or reading a whole library full of books before you find the thing. If there's something that it's so and so's book, it's Simon Sinek, as I mentioned earlier, or it's Daniel Pink, or it's whoever, or it's here's the principle that would, let's just throw that in. But fundamentally, it's about, do you know what? As a leader, I think so much of it is there are practices and principles. We don't quite know how this thing is going to unfold. We've got our goal. We're heading in a particular direction. We have our strategy. We don't quite know what's going to happen. So leaders must have the courage to rely on their own wisdom and insight. So to many respects, this is part of what I'm looking to do is like, I'm showing you a different way of thinking as a leader so that you can tap into your own wisdom and insights and the wisdom and insight of your team. And then, weigh it up. It doesn't mean that somebody, an idea pops into somebody's head and that's it, they're away. There's still that period of analysis and thinking, right, okay, that's a good idea. Let's explore that. Yeah, okay, that is the way. Let's move forward. Rather than like, attaching somebody to a drip so that they've got to keep coming back, or they've got to keep looking externally for all the answers, because I think a lot of answers, again, if you look at, whether it's the Bransons, the Hunters, whoever, when you hear them speak, there will always be points where they sought their own counsel. They took advice, and then at the end of the day, they had the courage to go with their own insight and to go, and I'm going to do this. Moments of courage. Those were the defining moments for those particular individuals. So I think being able to learn to look, learn to think, learn to observe, learn to collect those lessons and think, okay, that's how I use that within my business. I think that's a big part of leadership, actually. Certainly a big part of what I'm doing when I'm working with leaders.
Fascinating. Quick question. Do you do work with groups then and with organizations on teamwork as well as leadership and help them with those type things? I would think that once you get the leader going, you got to probably help them with the team as well.
Yeah, and actually, do you know what? Some of the best programs, some of the best, sometimes it's a question of working with the leader and saying, and here's what to do with your team, and here's some additional resources. The best like programs, if it's an intervention where I'm actually going in physically working rather than just coaching online or something, it works really well if you're working with like the leader or the leadership team and their direct reports. So nice. Leaders will be maybe like a month ahead in terms of the program, and it's following the same themes, but the leaders are going through it. So you're briefing them on, okay, your team is going to be going through the same sort of program. This is what your team's going to do. This is how you start to role model to your teams and support your teams. And then you start working with the teams and you say, your leaders have already been through this. And then the teams will kind of go, oh, yes, they've started to do that, you know. You think, good, right. Good. Well, that's what you hope. They'll go, God, yes, they have started to, because that's also an indication that leaders aren't just paying it lip service, they're actually doing something. So it does work best where the two are in parallel. Where things tend to not work quite so well, and that's a euphemism for not work, is where leaders will say, right, I'm going to put my team on a program because the leaders need to be involved in that at some level. It's not about, oh, let's fix the team. Leaders have to role model the behaviours that they want to see in other people. Otherwise, it's the same as like if you have a child and you say you tell them that you mustn't use bad language. Meanwhile, you yourself are swearing like a trooper. What do you think the child's going to do? They're going to copy what you do before they copy what you say. So it's really important that the leaders are involved as well. So, but just jumping back to the orchestral analogy, somebody, actually one of my colleagues at the Music and Drama Academy was telling me one day, this was a surprise to me, I didn't know it until this point. He said that there was I won't mention names because this is a really, really famous one, an instrumental performer who towards the end of his career had got moved into conducting, and of course he was really well known, so if his name was there on the billboard, people would turn up. Mm-hmm. And my colleague was saying, well, I played in the orchestra with this man as the conductor, and he was absolutely hopeless as a conductor, a great soloist, not mm-hmm. great. And I said, well, what do you do? I said, we're all following the first violin. Are you? So from the audience's point of view, to the untrained eye, I wouldn't know. They're a fraction of a second behind, but where the leader is not respected and not strong in the orchestra, people aren't following the leader, they're following the first violin. So, and this, I think, there's again a metaphor within, if the leaders aren't on board and the leaders aren't consciously and deliberately leading, there's going to be somebody else in the team who will just emerge as a leader, and people will follow them. So for a leader, that's actually quite a dangerous position to be in, because because you no longer have control of the situation. But you're right.
That's so true.
Crucial part of it.
Somebody will always emerge to lead in any situation. So if the organization's hierarchy isn't going to set the direction for that, other people will step up. I mean, I worked in some really strong union environments. We had 7 different unions in one company I worked for, and it was a nightmare. And the management team was not strong. And so the union leaders emerged as like little mafioso within this organization. And when I joined it, it was just a nightmare. But it was probably one of the most challenging organizations I've ever worked in, but I learned a lot. Yeah. But it was not very fun to work there.
Yeah, and there's that happens here as well in certain sectors where they're heavily unionized. And again, if the leadership isn't strong and respected, and there's not some dialogue and quite robust dialogue, then the union. I've been like delivering courses and so on, where the union representative, it was like, well, you've got to finish at 4 o'clock. If you don't, they will get up and walk out because it's worked a rule. And it's like, really? Yeah, they'll stand up because that's the culture that has evolved.
Yeah. Like, okay. And no overtime or whatever, but
and when it gets to that point, it's difficult to then backtrack, isn't it? So I remember my first job out of
college was at a toilet paper making plant, and the employees had come into this practice of a half hour on, a half hour off, a half hour they'd work, and then they'd take a half hour break. And they had just decided that on their own. And the management team had never done anything to say, no, you come to work, you're working an 8-hour shift. You work 8 hours, you've got 3 breaks. You don't work a half hour on and a half hour off. But over time, the factory had become more mechanized and more automated. And so they didn't need as many people. But with the way it was structured, they had teams that were twice as big as they needed. So the people decided on their own that they could work a half hour on and a half hour off. And part of my management group that they brought in as new college graduates, mind you, with very little leadership experience, was our job. We were supposed to stop this behavior and change this belief of the half hour on, half hour off norm and practice. And it was just, it was definitely a challenge. It was not fun because we were new college graduates, and the people that had worked there for 25 years didn't necessarily look upon us with any respect whatsoever, much less did they think that we should come into their normal way of behaving and change it or expect them to change it. So it was interesting.
What did you do, Sharon?
Pardon?
What did you do?
Well, we did a lot of things, and we tried a lot of things. A lot of what we ended up doing was we changed the way the organization ran and the way it worked. And we went from where they had different jobs and pieces of equipment that they would run to a team-based philosophy. And then we actually just shrunk the team sizes down to what made sense actually for the way the factory ran now. It wasn't the factory of 20 years ago where it took 20 people to run one line. It only took about 6 to 10 people. And with 10 people on a team, you could do your quality things. You could do your sanitation things. You could do your different checks. You could run the equipment. And everybody had to learn every job and then rotate through the different jobs and then rotate through breaks. So we just kind of, over a 3-year period, eliminated their ability to do that by shrinking the team sizes and changing the way they were compensated and the way they were paid, and then what the expectations were of the job. It was a pretty huge undertaking, but it came from our level of leadership, not from our leaders. And because we had to figure out a way to make it happen if any of us wanted to still work there. So,
and that's just as you're saying now, I'm thinking, do you know what? That was, hats off to you and your colleagues who arrived and thought, right, okay, this is what it's going to take 3 years. It's going to take a while, but how are we going to do this? And shame on the senior leaders who are going, I know there's this bit of dirty work here. We don't know what to do.
We'll just hire a bunch of new college grads and let them figure it out, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's, but again, it's that. And ideally, when we're talking about leadership and an entrepreneur moving into a business environment, you'd not let that culture to develop. We need to be sort of temperature checking what's going on there. But again, what you said there, that what interests me in particular is the thought process of that we're going to actually manufacture, if you will, the situation so that it's impossible for them to do that. So it's not just a question of trying to win over hearts and minds, because in that instance, it's like, sorry, I'm working like half a day for a full day's pay. I'm not going to change. Why would I do that?
Well, we tried that first. That wasn't, we tried other things, but it wasn't until we got really drastic on what we had to do. And the culture was so ingrained. And there were some people that left. There were people that took early retirement, and there were some people that left because they were like, I'm never going to learn how to do other jobs, especially when they had to rotate through the quality lab or through mechanics and testing and things. There were people that just didn't want to do those things. But if they did more things, the more skills they learned, the higher their pay. So some people, the younger people and the people that weren't so ingrained in the culture, saw the benefit of doing it that way and doing the new team-based way. But some people just left, because that's always going to happen when there's ever change. But like you said, the trick is to not ever let your culture get that way.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, I'll speak from my own experience, when you're running your business and you're running and figuring out and doing new things, sometimes you don't really pay attention and you don't know that things are happening. And it's nice to say, you should know everything that's going on in your organization because you're 100% responsible for it all. But it's another thing to know that shit's happening in your backyard and you don't necessarily see it all. And that's when you need to get help. But I've actually been involved in that, where stuff happened in my backyard and I didn't really know about it with a business partner, and you know, shame on me, lesson learned, bad lesson learned. But yeah, sometimes you can't be all seeing and all knowing. So that's why it's so important that you are a leader and you build a team and pay attention to that culture.
And also, I think having trusted people as well who can kind of report back to you. So you're absolutely right. You're working on building your company. You're working on your business rather than just in it. Although you're probably doing a bit of both as you start to build your team. It's impossible to have eyes and ears everywhere. And also, because you're in it, you're a co-creator of that culture. You probably don't notice it. It's only when things start to happen, you go, how did that evolve? Yeah. And then it's because it's the way that it's always done. So it's not easy to say. However, sometimes it is worth having, you know, a fresh pair of eyes, not necessarily calling a consultant and have them do something, but, you know, if you're hiring new team members, check in with them. Well, what do you find? You know, what's your impression? You've been here for the first month. What do you think? Really honest, because we want to have a sense check of our culture and how people outside see us. And if that person can say, well, do you know what? Everyone does well, and I really love that. It's great. Oh, good. But on the other hand, if I have an idea, I'm always told, oh, we've done that before and it didn't work. And you think, oh, now here's something we might want to address. So you're making sure that you're checking other people's perspectives. And also, if as a leader, you and your senior team, you've got an idea of the sort of culture that you want within your organization, and you've actually thought, not just, I want it to be a culture of innovation and buzzwords on a wall on a poster. It's, you know, those are words that are part of the vocabulary, but you're also thinking, how am I going to measure people on those behaviors? And then we start to tell you a bit of corporate speak, then we start to get into the realms of having some kind of a competency framework or something that says, okay, these are the behaviors that are part of our culture. We are respectful, we are innovative, we are authentic, whatever it is. But you start to clarify, what do we mean by that? And then you start to actually measure people on that. So, okay, give me an example of, you know, in the last 6 months, when have you been innovative within the scope of your role? Well, actually, I noticed that there was a problem with the production line. I could have left it, but I thought, no, we're going to save money if we do things this way. So I put that book. Excellent. But you're actually, you're consciously creating your culture. You're not just leaving it to chance, and you're not leaving it to a few buzzwords that could be interpreted in a bazillion different ways. You're actually quite specific about it. But again, it's worthwhile, the same as like with your vision and your strategies and so on. I mean, have your culture as part of your overall goal for your company. What kind of company do you want it to be? Because if you've got a strong culture that's a positive culture, then it's going to attract the right people to you. And so your hiring situation is going to be easier. You know, people think, oh, God, you know, don't go there. It's a revolving door. Your last 6 months, if you're lucky, then, you know, people aren't going to risk their current employment situations to come and work with you. So the culture, if you can be as specific about that as possible, and then think, right, okay, now I've got an idea of what I want to, how I want it to be, how am I going to put this into some sort of workable strategy so that I'm actively building a company that runs along these lines? And what are the indicators I'm looking for? I say I've got a culture of innovation. God, maybe it's come up with an idea for 6 months. It's not working, then, is it? No, you know, what's telling me that it all conversely? Do you know what? We've got some cracking ideas for marketing, for new products, for something else. Those are the indicators that, now the things that we've embedded are actually working. So it takes a little bit of thinking, but it's perfectly possible to take these kind of slightly fluffy things like culture and think, like, okay, let's have a strategy around culture. Let's see, how do we actually put these into applicable steps that we can measure, and we can make sure that this is the culture that we're building. It's not just something that we talk about, but we behave in a different way.
That is fabulous and priceless advice, because I would say 98%, if not 99% of the people that I've come in contact with and worked with have never even considered proactively creating their culture or having an impact on it. And I will say guilty, because I know I didn't either. Although I do know that when I switched from hiring for skills and qualifications to values, hiring on based on values and potential and what I saw in terms of what people could do, that changed everything in my organization. Yeah, it just made such a difference because I now learned that people can learn to do anything if they want to and if they're motivated to, but you can't teach them to have a work ethic. It's something either you have or not. You can't motivate people. Either they're motivated from within or not. Either they're self-starters or they're not. Either they're action takers or they're not. And once I switched from hiring for, okay, yeah, you got a degree, you can do this, you're technical, whatever, to I can teach you the technical skills. I can teach you how to be a good salesperson. I can teach you how, or we can find someone to teach you how to be a good salesperson. It's not going to be me. We can get you those skills, but if you have the right personality and you understand the work ethic and the values of the organization, then it's going to be a much better long-term fit than if you're just trying to do a job.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. That's priceless advice.
Yeah.
So, my dear, how can people get a hold of you if they want to know more or to work with you?
Probably the easiest way is to jump onto Facebook and look for me there. I have a group. It's only been up and running for a few weeks, so it's relatively new, a couple of months or so. Leadership Development for Entrepreneurs. So
I'm trying to put it up. I don't know if I can without my magnifying glass.
Yeah, right. But yeah, Leadership Development for Entrepreneurs. Or if you were just looking for my Facebook page, Annabelle Beckwith, then it's there. You click on the cover photo, and there it is. So I'm sharing various things around some articles of best practice and some mindset pieces as well, because in terms of the programs that I write and deliver and the coaching programs, it's very much about building skills, leadership, practical business skills, but it's also around the mindset of the leader. It is about developing clarity about your purpose and your vision and your goals and your strategy, the courage to actually stand for something, the courage to speak out when that might be difficult, the courage to have those difficult conversations if that's what you need to do. It's about developing the capabilities that you'll have, the actual knowledge and skills to grow your business. And also part of that capability is something that you touched on earlier, Sharon, when you were saying, I realized that the bottleneck was me, and I was certainly there as well, to realize what we also need to unlearn, because there's going to be things that we've been doing up until this point but no longer serve us. We need to stop doing that and do something different. So that's part of the capability piece. And then thinking about your character, your leadership character. What's your leadership brand? What type of culture do you want your organization to have? What do you want to be remembered for? What's the shadow that you cast? What's the legacy that you want to leave as a leader? So it's very much around the mindset as well as the practical elements of your strategy, your people, your hiring, your goals, your processes and procedures and the culture and the interpersonal working relationships that you want to have, you want people to have. So all sorts of stuff. So do join me there, or connect on LinkedIn as well. I'm on LinkedIn too.
I'll have to check my LinkedIn. I know we're friends on Facebook. I'll have to check LinkedIn and make sure we're connected there as well.
Yeah,
any parting words or parting shots for us?
Well, it's just to reiterate, again, a couple of things I said at the very beginning, and I do tend to say this whenever I'm working with leaders, is there are patterns of good leadership. You start, having done this for nearly 20 years, you start to see, look, this is what good leaders do, and this is what leaders are not so hot. This is what they do, and this is the impact that they have. There are patterns of leadership. You don't just see these within business, you see these all over the place. So, look laterally. If you're in a restaurant and you notice what's going on in the kitchen, watch the structures and the leadership communication there. There might be something that you can pick up. Go to the orchestra, watch the orchestra. What can you pick up there? Everywhere. There are lessons everywhere. So tune into those, because good leadership is good leadership wherever it is. And the final thing I would say is leadership is not just stuff that you know and things that you do. It is really, really, truly and honestly about who you are. I think everybody has leadership capabilities that are untapped, potential that is untapped, that they're really not aware of.
Fantastic day. We'll see you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Sharon. Right, take care. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.